Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Miss JD and White and Case webcast with Jacquelyn MacLennan. My name is Katie Day. I am a law student at Quinnipiac University, and I'm the social media manager for Miss JD, and I'm going to be moderating the event today. For those of you who aren't familiar with Miss JD, we're a nonprofit organization dedicated to the success of aspiring and early career women lawyers. Our programs, including our fellowship, public interest scholarship, global education fund, and events like these, work to support that goal. I just want to take a quick second and invite you all to join us this February on the 19th for our 8th annual Conference on Women in Law, which is going to be held at NYU. And a little bit about White & Case, who is helping us host this event today. White & Case is a leading global law firm with lawyers in 39 offices and 26 countries. It was among the first U.S.-based law firms to establish a truly global presence and provides counsel and representation in virtually every area of law that affects cross-border business, including complex transactions, arbitrations, and litigation proceedings. The firm practices in both established and emerging markets and works with some of the world's most respected and well-established banks and businesses, as well as startup visionaries, governments, and state-owned entities. And I would like to thank Jackie MacLennan for joining us today. A brief background on Jackie. She attended the University of Edinburgh Law School. She is a Scottish qualified lawyer specializing in EU competition law and international trade and regulatory law. She's based in Brussels, but spends substantial time in other White & Case offices, in particular London, New York, and Tokyo. Jackie has practiced law for more than 25 years. She began her career at Shepherd and Wedderburn, a very old, established Edinburgh law firm, before moving on to the European Commission in Brussels, and then to a boutique firm which merged with White & Case in 1998. She has represented world-renowned corporations, governments, and trade associations in some key groundbreaking cases before the European Commission and other national competition authorities, and also in litigations before European and national courts. She focuses on major international antitrust investigations, particularly global cartels, and has a wealth of experience in EU customs and trade law and regulatory requirements, in particular environmental. Jackie has accumulated substantial management experience over her career. She's currently a member of White & Case's Partnership Committee, which is the main governance body of the firm. She is a former member of White & Case Executive Committee, which is responsible for the firm's day-to-day management and strategy, and former executive partner of the Brussels office and head of the EU law practice. Jackie is highly committed to pro bono work and heads up the firm's global pro bono practice. She is an honorary fellow and visiting lecturer in EU law at the University of Edinburgh. Jackie is also a founding member of the Leadership Foundation for Women Lawyers in Scotland, which, like Miss JD, is a forum for senior women in the legal profession to provide concrete guidance and mentorship to women law students and recent graduates. We're going to start our conversation. I'm going to ask Jackie a few questions. If any of you in the audience have any questions, we're going to open it up a little bit later. And if anyone watching via video conference or webcast has any questions for Jackie, you can email them to me. My email is socialmediamanager@ms-jd.org. So hi, Jackie. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you very much for the lengthy introduction, Katie. I'm sorry to put you through that. I think it reflects the length of my career, sadly, all these words. No, I'm very flattered to have been invited to come here from White & Case. I'm very pleased to talk to the students that are listening today. I think that there are many, many other people who could be here from White & Case who would be much more successful in many ways than I am, and who would be able to talk with a lot more authority. But I'm very happy to try to give some concrete and hopefully useful ideas that I have accumulated along the way.
Awesome. And obviously, as we can tell from your bio, you've had a varied career and you've practiced in different types of organizations, taken on management roles, you've relocated from Scotland to Brussels. And what led to your interest in international law and to pursue this path?
Okay, well, I think my first starting point for my career turned out to be the studies that I chose to do in the University of Edinburgh. I believe, well, I think one word that kind of describes a lot of my life has been serendipity. It's not planning from day one to be where I'm sitting today or where I'm the type of role that I might have. I have to say that. And so I'm a great believer in seizing the opportunities that are presented to you, and when something looks interesting and for some reason your heart says, let's give this a go, that's what you should do. And if your head says, yeah, I can kind of tie that into what I've been doing to date, and maybe it's going to take me somewhere to wherever I think I may want to go one day, even more good reason for doing it. And so when I went to Edinburgh University, I picked the courses that really interested me. And I would recommend that to everyone because generally speaking, you do better in life with what interests you. And so I chose to do courses which didn't seem to fit together at the time, but which turned out to be just the courses that I needed to have done. I chose to do one course which was access to justice, different types of approach to legal problems, different ways to approach ensuring that legal representation got to the right people. That's turned out to be an incredibly valuable course, and for those of you who know Richard Susskind, he was one of the first people that talked at that course. I also chose international law subjects because they interested me. So I did international economic law. Why would I choose to do that? It was because it involved international public law, and it involved what was IP law, what was international commodity agreements, studying the GATT. And I put together with that course European law, and I studied European, what was then EEC, European Economic Community Law. I thought it was fascinating. I started to do competition law, and I thought at that stage, this is great, but who knows where this will take me. I thought that I would do, I would probably be an academic of some sort. And then when I decided that wasn't what I was going to do because of, again, some strange twist in life, I sat there in front of an examining board and the professors said, it's great that you want to do academic work, but it's really useful to qualify. So I thought, okay, I'm getting this advice, I should perhaps take it. And then I chose to qualify, and that's when I went to the old established firm in Edinburgh, which was a very good litigation firm. But I also applied to go and do a traineeship, an internship with the European Commission Legal Service. To be honest, it was so off the wall. I didn't know anyone who'd done it. I had no idea what you were supposed to do in order to try and maximize your chances of success. But it was very serendipitous. I had met David Edward, who then became a judge in the European Court, who asked me what I was planning to do with my life, and I said, well, I'm hoping to go and work for the European Commission. And the wonderful person that he is, he picked up his pen and he wrote a couple of letters, and then lo and behold, I went to Brussels, had an interview, and got that internship. And then it turned out that when I got there, what they needed was someone who could help with a case that was pending right at that moment on the International Rubber Agreement. Actually, I'd studied that. And then somebody else in the competition equipe needed research help from someone who could work on a case which is the seminal case for jurisdictional questions, which is the wood pulp case. And I had that research background, so I was part of that team. So it really, my studies turned out to be directly on point, and you could never have planned that. And that took me into the question of working outside Edinburgh. I'd never been opposed to working outside Scotland. To be honest, where I grew up, which is the north of Scotland, quite a rural environment really, there's always been a tradition of people doing their studies and then moving outside, and then the roots are strong, and I feel that today, but the roots pull you back, and so many people just assume that what they will have to do is to work somewhere else. And so I always thought I would work probably somewhere else. And then when I got to Brussels, I decided that actually it was a lot of fun there. And again, it wasn't planned that I would spend the next, actually what turns out to be 30 years of my life in that place. But that's what I decided to do. I decided that I would stay in Brussels. And so I did. But it was my university studies that really took me into the career that has evolved.
And we have quite a few law students that are going to be tuning in who may be interested in international law. So can you tell us a little bit about what it means to practice international law, the different types of international law, and I know you were a litigator, and from the transactional perspective as well.
Okay, sure. Well, it's true. International law is a really broad church, you might say. When I think of international law, my immediate thought is international public law. It's the state disputes. And international law is absolutely fundamental, especially in these troubled times, because international law is a way that states can resolve their disputes without launching explosive devices at each other. So international law is really, really important. So that's one strand that people can get involved in, pure international law, working for an international governmental organization or working for the legal service of a state. That means you're really deeply involved in pure international public law. We also do a lot of international arbitration. That can be, again, it can involve state disputes. We work a lot with bilateral investment treaties. We have huge cases. We have many of our partners have market-leading, world-beating practices there. And in fact, particularly women. It's interesting in White & Case. A lot of the very successful partners are women. International arbitration is another form of international law, and you're litigating or you're arbitrating these disputes in places like London, in Paris, in Stockholm, in Singapore, and you're dealing with international law. The type of, or you can have WTO, World Trade Organization disputes. They are dispute settlement proceedings which are brought in Geneva. We, in our office in Geneva, we do that. We also have international arbitration there. All different types of international law. WTO law is international trade law. The type of law that I do is a little different to these areas. I deal a lot with global antitrust investigations. So I will be dealing, in fact, a case that I've been dealing with right now is probably a good example. It's a case which has involved an investigation taking place in the US, DOJ, Brussels, the European Commission, the Brazilian authorities, the Mexican authorities, the Japanese authorities, the Korean authorities, and the Canadian authorities were all investigating at the same time. And so when you're pursuing one of these cases, although I am very focused on the Brussels part, you are always working with lawyers who are handling investigations in other parts of the world, because of course you have to ensure that everything is consistent. So the types of antitrust cases that I deal with have a global component. And I also do international customs law, for example, which can involve litigating in Germany, but also at the same time pursuing the matter before the European Commission with all the different member states, and also working with the World Customs Organization, which happens to be based in Brussels. That's also international law of a different type. And then I have an environmental case just now, which is also very international. It's a product which is regulated in a totally different way in the US if you compare that with Europe. It's called bisphenol A. And within Europe, it's regulated in totally different ways within the member states. And so we are proceeding, working for clients before the European Commission, challenging some of the regulations that are at member state level. And we have a case which at the moment is pending in the highest French courts, but really involves an international situation. So international law can be very, very varied. So from the students' perspective, those who are listening today, I think that you have an enormous number of courses that are there at your disposal in different universities. And I think it's really a question of trying to get involved in something which just piques your interest and then following up. And you never stop learning. So the fact that you haven't studied something at university doesn't mean to say that you can never, ever pick up an interest in that as you move on.
And I know there are so many facets of international law, but are there any skills that you think are really useful for someone who's interested in entering international law?
I think the skills are probably the skills that are useful for everything in life. I think you've got to be tenacious, you've got to be curious, you've got to be prepared to get involved in new things that you probably have never studied before, but you just have to kind of, get the bit between your teeth and really focus on what you need to do to find out the answer to a particular problem. I don't think that the skills that are necessary for a career in international law are different from the careers that are necessary for a success, or different to the skills that are necessary for a successful career in anything else. Having said that, you do have to take into account that if you choose a career that's in that area, you are going to have to bear in mind some of the disadvantages that come along with that. The advantages, which I think are kind of obvious, are you get to see different places, you travel the world, you work with people from all sorts of different cultures, you're exposed to different legal systems and all of that. If that kind of gives you a buzz, you find fascinating. The downside, and I speak from experience and the lines in my eyes, under my eyes kind of tell that, the downside is that you do have to travel more, so you have to spend more time on planes. Maybe that's good, maybe that's bad, depends how you feel that particular day, but that's one aspect. So you have to be much more adaptable. You also have to get used to the fact that you deal with conference calls, with lawyers in all different parts of the world, and therefore you get a real mastery. And this is one skill that probably you learn, which you don't need for more domestic types of law. But I can tell you the world time clock, that is the skill that you need to master, because you can put in where it is that you're trying to link up all these people, and the world time clock gives you this chart which has got I like simple things, red, orange, green. And you're trying to find as much of the orange at least to put these people together, and it always involves somebody being there at 1 in the morning. But that's the downside of the type of career that's involved there. And that also does mean that if you're trying to kind of organize yourself and you have children, for example, that's something you have to bear in mind. If you know that you don't know what you might be doing in a week's time, you've got to make sure that you've got your life organized to enable you to do that unexpected thing.
And how do you feel you kept your life organized as you moved through your career and balanced all of the different things you needed to?
I think that's a really difficult question, because I think you cannot plan your life to have balance at all times, to be very honest. It just doesn't work that way. If you're looking for something which is going to give you that satisfaction, that kind of sense of enjoyment, that's what drives you to get up in the morning. You need to be doing something which you really value and you really enjoy. And the truth, or at least my experience, is that the types of things that give you that sense of value and give you that sense of enjoyment are also probably quite all-encompassing, and you can't kind of just dabble in something. And that means that when you're trying to ensure that your life is sort of in kilter overall, you just have to accept there will be times when work is absolutely overwhelming, and there are other times when the other demands on your time seem to be overwhelming, and you really just have to make sure that whatever you're doing at a particular time seems right for you. Now, what I think is necessary to do that is a degree of organization. I think you've got to be really well organized. And I think you've got to learn to delegate. And I say that, and I can give you lots of stories for why I think that's true. And I would also say that, you know, this is not a female thing. I think that maybe 30 years ago, you would have said, yeah, well, you know, it's much more traditional that the woman is the primary caregiver and it's the woman that does all of this. And if you look at all the statistics, actually there's not so much change. It's quite remarkable, but it's still the woman in the household who kind of works out works out a lot of the childcare arrangements and works out, you know, the shopping list and whatever. But I think the big change that I've seen in the course of my career is the fact that it's become much more normal and much more, just usual to have shared responsibilities. And so when I'm working with young male lawyers in my team, it's exactly the same issues that apply, and it's almost the same advice that I give to people. There's no gender difference. It's, you know, how are you going to organize this? And so if you have an international law career, the one thing I would say you need is really reliable arrangements so that you've got your life and your work sorted out, hopefully, but you never do. So what you really need is good backup. And actually what you need is good backup for that backup, because that's all going to fall apart, and it's good backup on that. And it's just like having a dog, to be honest. Things just don't always work out as they should, and you've got to plan for that. And so that's why I say being organized is really key, and then learning how to delegate, because there are some things that you just are not going to be able to do, and you shouldn't even worry about them. And that's something else which I guess it takes time to learn.
And you've successfully navigated the path to partnership and senior leadership roles. Do you think you faced additional or different challenges following that path as a woman?
It's actually a hard question to answer, because I think in the environments that I've been part of, I have never felt that I had to face a barrier because I was a woman. I've always worked in meritocracies, whether that was you know, a law firm in Scotland or the European Commission at that time, or working in the boutique practice or working in White & Case. I've always felt that it was a meritocracy and that really you succeeded depending on how good you were. On the other hand, what I have seen over the years is that there are times when I've faced, or I've seen others face, what is almost like a kind of, well, I know the term now because I've learned this from my daughter. It's called benevolent sexism, which is this well-placed, kind approach, but which actually is very unhelpful for women. And that is you have a small baby, I know you don't want to travel, therefore I'm not going to ask you to work on this case. Please don't do that. Please ask me, am I able to organize my life so that I can work on this case? And I've seen that happen. That's happened to me, and it's happened many times I've seen over the years, and it's something which I think we need to change. There's another way sometimes that you see that, and which does happen with women, and that's male partner will say, you know, there's this problem, you would be great if you could just get involved, you know, you're very empathetic, you've got these skills which I don't really have, will you not just, you know, sort this out? And you maybe do because you don't really think about it, but actually the better thing is to say, no, that's your responsibility. You've probably got the same skills, and if you haven't, you can develop them, and don't get involved in that. And that's something which it can take you a little while to realize that. And that's, I think, something which women often are asked to do. So that takes me to my belief, which is a really, really, really strongly held belief, that what we have to do as an organization, we being all organizations actually, is face the fact that there is unconscious bias, and we have to start training people to recognize that. Now, you can call it inclusiveness training, you can do whatever you like, but actually that's what we're tackling. And I do think that it's not something which is a feature for anyone of a particular age, of a particular background. I think it creeps into all of us at all times. And so that's something which organizations need to deal with.
And I have in here, you're also an honorary fellow at Edinburgh University's Europa Institute. Tell us a little bit about that, how the role came up, and what interested you to take that on.
Okay, it was sort of serendipitous. I was invited by one of my professors to go and speak at the tercentenary of Edinburgh University's law school. So I went along, and it was a little bit awe-inspiring because I realized that I was speaking and there was quite well-known politicians and judges and all sorts of other people. And I had to talk about my recollections of Edinburgh, and I confessed that I had always really, really, really wanted people to believe that I was French but just happened to have a Scottish name. And so apparently I had managed to convince at least the librarians. But it was a very nice occasion, and despite my remarks, a couple of the professors that I talked to said, oh, well, it would be great if you would come and talk to the students, because it's good for our students to see what you can do with the law degree that you get from this establishment. And so a number of years ago, I went back and I gave a couple of seminars, and then because I enjoyed it, and apparently the students did, surprise, surprise, but I was then asked if I would kind of formalize that and become an honorary fellow. So I did that. So it's something which I really enjoy doing, and I just think it's really good for all of us as we practice and as we move on in life to really keep close ties with students and people of that age and understand what's driving them. And so it's something which I get a lot of satisfaction out of, and I hope that when I go and I give a class and it's from my perspective and it's taking the kind of academic principles, but it's tying them into a case and it's trying to explain to students how this might work in practice, then that's something which is of interest to them. So it's really two-way benefit, hopefully.
And you've done so many things in your career. You've worn a lot of different hats. Is there anything that you would do differently if you had the opportunity?
There's probably lots of things that other people would wish that I'd done differently, but to be frank, I don't look back. I really don't. I don't think it's a healthy thing for any of us to do. I personally, I think I'm very blessed. I have a great career, which I really enjoy. I have a fantastic family, and I really feel that life has been pretty good. Now, do I wish that I had time for other things just now? Maybe, yeah. It'd be nice to spend more time swimming. It'd be nice to be a better skier. But on the whole, I wouldn't look back to say, what is it that I should have done differently? I do think that the experience that I've gained leads me to say to people, look, you've just got to find your own way. That's the belief that I have, and it sounds very trite, and I'm sure people say it all the time, but I do think it's worth repeating. Success comes in many, many different forms, and success for one person is not necessarily success for another. And is success the title that you have, or the money that you make, or the number of people that you have reporting to you? All sorts of different ways that you can define that. But ultimately, success is what really gives you a sense of self-worth, and that's individual. That's something for all of us. And so I would say to people, and this is what comes from looking back and from what I think I've learned, it's, go for the opportunities that are presented to you. Don't limit what you do because you think you can't do it. And I guess, many of us know the research is there, that women, statistically at least, tend to worry that they are not able to do something, so they don't put themselves forward. So there's a simple way of dealing with that, which is organizations have to put women forward. That's something which I think is essential, and we can talk a lot about what I think organizations ought to do. But equally, women and males as well, when they're asked to do it, is if you are asked, just give it a go. And if you don't know what to do, don't let that stop you. Go find out. There are people all around. If I look at White and Case, and I know my own career, there have been many times when I've thought, I don't really know how to do this. But you go find people who've done it before, and they are always willing to share their time and share their expertise. And so for younger people, whether that's men or women who are starting out, I think that's something to remember. There really is a network there for you to establish for yourself and to benefit from. So I would say to people, just go for it, and go for it in a way that is right for you. And don't look at what other people have done, and don't feel that you, especially I think this is a message for women, don't feel that you have to follow a career which is necessarily in a very straight line. Some people do. They will go, if it's a law firm partnership, they will go step by step through associateship and into partnership and through the partnership and reach success that way. Others will do a career which takes some twists and turns. And honestly, anything is possible. But you have to be prepared to work hard I think at all times of your life, and really seize the opportunities that are presented to you. And then I would say at other times, look for opportunities and then put yourself forward. And again, that's not a male or a female thing. I think it's for all of us to remember. And so I do think that the opportunities are there, and I think that there's a lot of discussion at the moment as to how to encourage women, particularly, to go for these opportunities. There's lots of literature that's out there. My experience is lawyers are a bunch of people who are pretty neurotic. I think that if we look at what drives us, many of us who are here in this room or around about, whether we're students or whether we're quite established in our careers, there is this kind of sense of angst. And actually, I don't think that's so bad. I just think that you shouldn't be public in your angsting. And if you are worried about whether you're doing something as well as you can be doing it, well, good, because that means probably you'll put a bit more effort into doing it better. And so I do think, though, that we shouldn't, let our neuroses be too much on our sleeves, as it were, because other people can make assumptions about whether we want something depending on whether we've sort of publicly agonized as to whether we can do it. So better, I would say, that you give the impression that you're omnicompetent, and then you might just be asked to do something which you're not quite sure whether you are competent for, but with a bit of assistance, you can turn out to be really good.
And do you have any advice in particular for young women who are beginning their careers or who are in law school and are about to get started with their first internships and jobs?
Gosh, I've got lots of different things that I think are important. I do think it's important, as I've said, to decide, well, okay, first of all, what I think is important is you can have a view of life which is that you really want to be in this particular role. You may be a summer associate at White & Case, and you know that you really want to be chair of the firm. But actually, there's very few people like that. And so I think that what is important is to kind of salami slice your goals and just work from one step to the next step. So if you're interested in becoming or joining a law firm, and you think that what you should do is to become a partner there one day and you don't quite know where that's going to take you, that's absolutely fine. But when you start your internship, be thinking and be alert and be aware of what you really need to do to be seen to be someone who's committed to that environment and who is quite directed towards making partner one day. And you may not really know what that is, what that involves, but you want to be perceived as someone who's in the organization and wanting to make a success of it. So you want to take things, as I said, step by step. So if it's an internship, you want to be seen in your internship. You want to be visible. You want people to perceive you as someone who's really smart and really keen to take on new challenges and to do all of these cliched things. But if you're quiet and you work behind the scenes and no one knows you're there, you're not positioning yourself best to move from that internship into a job. And then if you're an associate, again, you want to be positioning yourself to move forward and become a partner. And that's something which, as I say, you don't have to spend your life with a very clear, fine sense of this is what I want to be at the end of the day. But I do think it's important that you get things right to go through an organization step by step in the best way you can. And you need to be adaptable in order to do that.
I'm going to open it up for some questions from either the live audience or the webcast. So we'll start here. Does anyone in the audience have any questions?
Joe.
You haven't mentioned that you have 3 beautiful children, and I know that there are people on the phone who would like to hear more about that. So take your answer to how do you organize your life one level deeper, and tell us about your children a little bit and give us a story about something.
Yeah, I mean, I find that as actually a hard one because I define myself by the fact that I am being very fortunate and I have a partner who I met at Edinburgh Law School, so it's been seminal in my lives in many ways, and I have 3 children. But I wouldn't tend to introduce myself by saying immediately, I have 3 children. And I do remember one particular event where partners were introduced, and I was introduced by another partner who said, you know, this is Jackie, and she has 3 children, and, you know, she's also a competition lawyer. And I waited, and everybody else was introduced, and there was no mention. And, of course, everybody else was male, and there was no mention of that. So I said, well, you know, I'm really pleased to be here, and I just wanted to add that, you know, he has 2 wonderful boys, and he has 3. Don't you have? And I did think, well, this is a bit artificial, but let's do it that way. But you're absolutely right, Joe. I do have 3 children. I have 2 boys, and I would say to you, you know, you always want to be sure that you have your photographs and all the rest of it with you. And I just was remembering, I didn't know that Joe was going to ask this question, but I was remembering the last time, the first time actually, I ever had to be interviewed to find out, you know, what it was that, I think the question was, you know, what made you become a lawyer? And I was quite nervous about it. I'm quite nervous about this, but I remember saying to my daughter, and this was probably 5 years ago, and so this is a very crumpled up piece of paper, but I said to my daughter, oh, I've got to do this thing, it's in London, I'm a bit nervous, what shall I wear? So she was great, and she said, okay, you know, here's what you should wear, and then she gave me this, and I found it in my pocket, and so she said, good luck for your interview tomorrow, and remember to mention me, lots of love, Flora. So I will mention Flora. But it is important. Of course it's really important that you feel that you are giving your family a fair amount of time, and also you're giving your work a fair amount of time. And that balance of time may differ as your children are growing up. And that balance of time may differ, as I said before, on a day-to-day basis. And so my children have, well, they're the products of their upbringing. My husband and I chose to devote ourselves in different ways over the years to the childcare that we had to engage in. I think we both thought at one point that we would be able to do everything. And the moment that came that persuaded us that perhaps that wasn't possible was when he was working for another international law firm. He was doing a banking deal which involved New Zealand and Australia and Belgium and London and goodness knows where else. And it was basically there were negotiations for 3 days. So he wasn't home for 3 days, and I was in Japan. And we had, in the way that we organized our childcare, decided that we couldn't rely on just having our children going to a creche, which is the way that lots of people do it in Belgium, but that we needed to have somebody at home. And so we tapped into a fantastic network that exists in Brussels. And we had someone who was happy to stay overnight when we weren't there, but when it was the 3rd night and she still hadn't heard from my husband other than to say, I'm terribly sorry, I'm not going to be home still, we thought, you know, we're going to have to work this out differently. And so what we've done over the years is I've reduced my working hours at certain periods of my life, and then he has, over the last, not sure how many years now, he now works from home, and that meant that when I was traveling kind of wildly on the executive committee, that wasn't going to be a problem because he was able to be at home. And I think that, you know, every family has to find what's right for them, and what's right for one family is not right for another. But my children, if you ask them, they will probably give you some terribly scary stories of what happened to them when I didn't turn up at the school gate. The truth of the matter is, I think that the 2 boys learned to be fairly resistant and resilient, and the second one certainly learned that it was a good idea to talk to people, certainly in the school environment, because once you made friends with the secretaries, they would take you in when your mother didn't appear on time and give you milk and biscuits. So, you know, there's, I think that everyone has their own stories of how to ensure that their family life is looked after in the best way possible for them, and I'm delighted with the fact that I have my 3 children. And they're older now, you see. That's the difference. I mean, I have said, I think on record as saying, you know, legal career is not so different from bringing up children. It's unpredictable, it's time-consuming, and it's incredibly rewarding. So I think my recommendation is everybody should try both, but that's personal choice.
Any other questions? We'll take one. We have one from our webcast viewers. They would like to know, out of all the things you've done in your career, has there been one that was a favorite for you?
I like arguing in court. That is something where you work incredibly hard to be sure that you've got the facts mastered, the law mastered, you're really on top of the case. You go in there, you make the arguments, and you hope that you are doing it to the very best of your ability, and if the client's sitting behind you, there's that kind of nervous push. And I really like winning. And that was actually a very nice experience. One of the cases that I was involved in, we had a remarkable success before the European Court a couple of months ago, and the judgment came through. It was for a Japanese client, and I happened to be in Japan, and so that was really a very nice experience. And it was a case where there were a number of other companies, and we were the only company to have a good result. So that sort of even made it even better. But that is something which I enjoy, and I have to say that is something which gives me that sense of like a real buzz, which is I think what other lawyers will get through completing a really interesting deal or some big financing transaction. We all have whatever it is that drives us most effectively.
Okay, we have one more question from our webcast. We talked a little bit about organizations and how they can increase the diversity, especially with women. What are some things you think that organizations can do specifically to increase that? They wanted you to elaborate a little more on that.
All right. Yeah. I mean, I have quite strong views on this. I am appalled, to be honest, at the current situation. When I look around and I look at the number of women represented in leadership positions in law firms or in companies or generally in the workplace. And I think back 30 years ago, because I graduated in 1984. In 1984, George Orwell and all the rest of it, you're kind of looking at what life is going to be like in the future. And I was very complacent in 1984. I graduated, I looked around, I could see that there were more than 50% women coming into law schools at that point. I could see that the best degrees were being taken by women. I thought that the world where my mother, who had got married and therefore couldn't continue to work, had ended. I looked at law practice and I thought it's just a matter of time between now where there are very few women, but the women that I see in the workplace are manifestly very capable and very good, and the future, which is that my friends and myself will be doing whatever it is we think we have the potential to do. And then as I've carried on and I've looked around, I've realized that really the world has not changed in the way that it should. And so I saw some figures. I think it's the World Economic Forum has said that it will take another 80 years until there's gender parity in the workplace. So there's something manifestly wrong. And it's not women, that's for sure. So it must be something organizational. And I think, therefore, that organizations have to face the fact that we can't just let things evolve as they have been evolving, because there hasn't been the change that we need. So we have to accelerate what we're doing. And I think that from an organizational point of view, that means, first of all, that you've got to have a real commitment to diversity and gender diversity. That means it's got to be commitment from the people really at the top of the firm or the top of the organization, and it's got to percolate through. It can't just be lip service from the CEO. It's got to be that all of the line managers, whoever they are, what level they are, they have to really believe that they've got to encourage women and have more women, and that is better for the organization. So you need to have the statements there. You need to have absolute buy-in from management throughout the organization. You've got to have role models. You've got to have women to be seen to be in big jobs, because that is the way to send a signal to younger women. Yes, you can do this. You've got to have women in these big jobs, I have to say, communicating with younger women to say there's absolutely no reason why you can't do this. So one of my favorite quotes is one that when I first heard it, it really resonated with me, but now I hear it quite often and you may know it. It's Madeleine Albright. There's a special place in hell for women who don't help other women. But of course it's not just a women thing. So you've got to have men in leadership roles and throughout organizations also realizing, as I think many are now doing, that actually the workplace is better when you have more women represented there, and that you've got to have men really looking out for women and not just women doing that. So you have these organizations like He for She, and you have men advocating for real change. I think it's important that males are not able to kind of take over the agenda and they don't define how we do everything, but it's absolutely imperative that this is not seen just as a women's, as a role or as an issue that women have to deal with. I do think that within organizations you've got to have very clear measures as to what you're going to do. And so we in White & Case have got a talent management program. We've got a program which is leadership support. I think that that is absolutely essential. I think that we always need to remember we're not taking measures to fix women. That's not the issue here. Women don't need to be fixed, but organizations are a product of their history and they do need to change. And therefore I think, for example, that there has to be more openness to flexibility. And that's not a women's issue. That is an issue for absolutely everyone. But technology facilitates that. I don't believe that we should have a situation where everybody can work at home all the time. I think that's a disaster because we should be parts of teams. But I do think we need to be open to more flexibility. I think there's a change now. People understand that you may not have someone with a full-time working hour commitment, but they are committed to the organization very fully, 100%, and they will be great people to have in that organization. And if you take a longer-term view, that is something which you really want. You want engaged people who are committed to organizations who are there for the long term. And so my personal view is at the moment that we do need to have measures which are specifically aimed at women. And I do think there's a value in having women-only events or training. But I don't think it's because there's an issue or a problem with women. I think there's a problem that's there. It's not going to change unless we take specific measures to change it. And when the playing field looks like it's really being leveled, then of course there's no need to be doing anything like having a global women's initiative. But at the moment, with the fact that when you look at the statistical balance within our partnership and within other partners, we do need to do more.
Thank you. We are actually all out of time, so I want to say a big thank you to Jackie for joining us. This has been wonderful. And a big thank you to everyone who's here live and everyone who tuned in via the webcast and the video conference.
Thank you.